The morning sun rose slowly over the vast rolling hills of the Montana ranch. Golden rays stretched across the fields, touching the tall grasses and sparkling on the quiet stream that wound through the property. Jake Matthews, a rugged man in his mid-40s, stood on the wooden porch of his farmhouse, cup of coffee in hand, watching his cattle graze lazily. He had spent most of his life in these hills raising cattle and living simply. Life had taught him to be patient, careful, and self-reliant. He liked it that way. The quiet, the routine, the endless horizon, it was all he needed. Jake had always been a man of action, not words. He had few friends, and the ones he had were far away, scattered across small towns or lost to the flow of life. He liked it that way. After all, the ranch needed attention, and he had little time for unnecessary distractions. Still, there was a certain emptiness he could never shake, a part of him that sometimes longed for something more, though he had grown used to living without it. That morning, like most mornings, he moved slowly through his chores. He checked the fences, fed the animals, and walked through the barn, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch waking up. A gentle breeze carried the smell of fresh hay and the faint scent of wildflowers from the distant hills. Everything was calm, predictable, and safe. Jake liked the predictability. Life had enough surprises already. But that morning was different. As he reached the edge of the porch, he noticed a figure walking up the dirt road leading to his house. At first, he thought it might be a delivery driver or a neighbor. But as the figure drew closer, he realized it was a young woman, probably in her mid-20s, carrying a small suitcase and wearing a determined expression. Her hair caught the sunlight, shining like threads of gold, and her eyes, bright and earnest, seemed to look straight into his. Jake squinted, unsure whether to call out or wait. The woman moved with purpose, her steps steady despite the rough dirt road. As she reached the bottom of the porch stairs, she stopped and looked up at him. "Excuse me," she said, her voice steady but warm. "Are you Jake Matthews?" Jake, surprised by the sudden appearance and direct question, straightened his back and nodded. "That's me. Can I help you?" The woman smiled, and Jake noticed a certain confidence in her posture, a calm that contrasted with the suddenness of her arrival. "I came here to marry you," she said simply. Jake blinked. He stared at her, unsure if he had heard her correctly. "Marry me?" he repeated, his voice rough from years of speaking only to the animals or the wind. "Yes," she replied without hesitation, her eyes steady on his. "I came to marry you." For a moment, Jake didn't know what to say. His mind raced. Who was this woman? Why would she come here to his isolated ranch and say something so bold? He opened his mouth to ask, but no words came. He was caught between disbelief and curiosity, a rare feeling for a man who had faced storms, broken fences, and stubborn bulls without a second thought. The woman took a step closer. "I know this sounds sudden," she said, "but I've been searching for you for a long time. I had to find you. I had to tell you in person." Jake took a step back, setting his coffee down on the porch railing. Something about her voice stirred a memory deep inside him, a memory he hadn't thought about in 20 years. His brow furrowed as he studied her more closely. There was something familiar about her, something that tugged at a part of him he had long locked away. "Do I know you?" he asked cautiously. The woman tilted her head, her eyes softening. "I think you do," she said. "Maybe not now, but you will remember." Jake's heart beat a little faster. He had rescued a young girl from a dangerous situation once, 20 years ago, on a summer trip far from here. He had saved her from falling into a rushing river while she had been exploring the mountains with her family. She had been scared, crying, and alone. He had carried her back to safety and never thought he would see her again. Could this be her? Could it really be the girl he had saved all those years ago? I don't understand, Jake said, his voice shaking slightly, though he tried to hide it. "You can't just come here and say that." "I don't even—" The woman held up her hands in a gesture of peace. "I know it's a lot to take in," she said. "But please just listen. I know who you are. I know what you did for me. And I've never forgotten it. I've never forgotten you." Jake took a deep breath, trying to calm the rush of emotions that swirled inside him. Memories he hadn't thought about in years came flooding back. The fear in her eyes, the weight of her small hand in his, the relief of carrying her to safety. He remembered the river, the rocks, the fear that she might slip. He remembered the quiet after everything was safe, when she had clung to him and whispered a thank you that had stayed with him ever since. He looked at her again. She looked older, taller, grown into a young woman, but the eyes were unmistakable. They were the same as that frightened little girl's eyes. She had grown up, but something in her gaze carried that same spark of life, the same courage, the same gratitude. I saved you," he said slowly, almost to himself. You're that girl?" The woman nodded. "Yes," she said softly. "I'm her, and I've come back because I never forgot you. I wanted to find you. I had to tell you how important you were in my life." Jake felt a mixture of awe, disbelief, and a strange warmth spreading through him. He had lived a life of solitude, never expecting anything so extraordinary to walk up his dirt road on a bright morning. And yet here she was, the girl he had saved, standing before him, grown into someone he could barely recognize but would never forget. The woman set her suitcase down gently. "I know this is sudden," she said again, "but I've traveled a long way to be here. I've imagined this moment for years. I need you to hear me, to know that I didn't come here without thought. You changed my life, and now, I hope we can have a chance at more." Jake's hands were shaking slightly as he reached out to steady himself on the railing. His mind was spinning, but one thing was clear: this was real. Somehow, impossibly, this young woman, this girl, was standing here, speaking words he never expected to hear. He sank into the porch chair, running a hand over his face. 20 years, he murmured. "It's been 20 years since that day. I never thought I'd see you again." The woman smiled, a soft, knowing smile. "I've always remembered you," she said. "I grew up thinking about that summer, thinking about the man who saved me. I wanted to find you when I was old enough to understand what it all meant. And now, I'm here." For a long moment they sat in silence, letting the memories and the present mingle. The breeze whispered through the trees. The cattle grazed peacefully, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Jake felt something he hadn't felt in years, a spark of hope, of connection, of something extraordinary entering his ordinary life. Finally, he looked at her, his eyes meeting hers, and felt a strange mix of fear and anticipation. "You really came here to marry me?" he asked, almost whispering, as if saying it aloud might make it disappear. She nodded, her expression calm and resolute.
"Yes, I came to you because I believe we were meant to meet again."
"Because I've never stopped thinking about you. And because I love you even if you don't know it yet." Jake's heart pounded. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. His life, as quiet and predictable as it had been, would never be the same again. The girl he had saved 20 years ago had returned, and with her came a story he never expected to be part of, but a story he could no longer ignore. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows over the porch and the ranch beyond, Jake and the young woman sat together, sharing stories of the past and dreams of the future. The world outside continued on, but for Jake, the moment stretched into something timeless, a beginning that he never saw coming but somehow always knew was possible. For the next few hours, Jake and the young woman, Emily, sat on the porch talking quietly as the ranch's usual sounds carried around them. The wind rustled the leaves in the old oak trees, and the cows occasionally lowed in the distance. Jake found himself watching her closely, noticing small details he had never seen before. The gentle curve of her smile, the way her hands moved as she spoke, the calm confidence in her voice. She was no longer the little girl he had rescued from the river, but there was still something familiar in her presence, something that reminded him of that summer so long ago. Emily spoke first about her journey, about the long path she had taken to find him. She told him about the letters she had written but never sent, about the days she had spent tracing memories, photographs, and stories from the people who had been part of her childhood. She told him how for years she had wondered if she would ever see him again, if she would ever be able to tell him how much that single act, his saving her life, had meant to her. Jake listened quietly, his heart swelling with a mix of pride, awe, and guilt. Pride because he had saved her, awe because she had grown into such a strong and determined woman, and guilt because life had taken them on different paths for so many years. He had tried to forget that summer in some ways, burying the memory under the work and the loneliness of ranch life, but now it came rushing back, vivid and alive. "I remember that day," Emily said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "I remember falling into the river, the water pulling me down, and I was so scared. I thought I would never see anyone again. And then you were there. You lifted me out. You saved me. I've never forgotten it, not for one single day. Jake nodded slowly, swallowing the lump in his throat. He could see it now. The terrified little girl clinging to him, the panic in her eyes, and the relief that had washed over her once she was safe. I remember too, he admitted, his voice quiet. I didn't think I would ever see you again. I didn't even know if you'd remember me. Emily reached out and placed her hand lightly on his. I never forgot. You changed my life that day, not just by saving me physically, but by showing me that there are good people in the world, that someone would risk everything for someone else, that someone cared enough to act when it mattered most. That stayed with me my whole life. Jake's chest tightened. He had lived a life of solitude and routine, never thinking much about the impact of his actions beyond the immediate moment. He had always thought of that day as just something he had done, nothing extraordinary. But hearing her words, seeing her eyes shine with sincerity, he realized that the simplest actions could ripple through someone's life in ways he would never fully understand. They spent the morning and early afternoon reminiscing about the past, but gradually Emily began to ask about the present. She asked about the ranch, about the cattle, about the long, quiet years he had spent alone. Jake found himself opening up in a way he hadn't with anyone in years, sharing stories of hardship and triumph, of lonely winters and long summer days. Emily listened attentively, asking questions, laughing at his dry humor, and offering her own thoughts and reflections. At some point, she spoke about her own life, the years she had spent growing up, going to school, working odd jobs, and learning to live independently. She told him about the places she had been, the people she had met, and the experiences that had shaped her. And through it all, she circled back to that summer, to the memory of him rescuing her from the river, and how it had inspired her to be brave, to be kind, and to trust in people's goodness. Jake felt a mixture of admiration and disbelief. She had turned a single terrifying moment into a life full of purpose and determination, and now she was here in front of him, bringing the past and the present together in a way that made his heart ache and swell at the same time. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, Emily grew more earnest. She began to explain why she had come to him with the bold declaration that she wanted to marry him. She told him that for years she had dreamed of seeing him again, of telling him that the moment he saved her had changed everything. She had imagined standing in front of him, just like she was now, hoping he would remember and hoping he would understand the feelings that had grown inside her over 2 decades. I know it might sound strange, she said, her voice soft but firm, but I've thought about this moment for so long. I wanted to come here to meet you again as an adult, to show you that I never forgot. I didn't just want to thank you. I wanted to be with you if that was possible. Jake stared at her in silence. He wanted to speak, to say something, anything, but the words stuck in his throat. It was overwhelming. Emotions, memories, and an unexpected spark of connection all at once. He had spent years building walls around his heart, and now this young woman, this girl-turned-woman he barely recognized, had appeared and shattered them effortlessly. He began, then paused, trying to find the right words. I don't know what to say. I never expected this. I don't even know how to process it. Emily smiled gently, understanding his hesitation. I know, she said, and I'm not asking for an answer right now. I just wanted you to know the truth. I wanted you to understand why I came here. I wanted you to see that. I've carried this with me for a long time, and now that I've found you, I had to speak it out loud. They fell into a comfortable silence, broken only by the sounds of the ranch. Jake's mind wandered back to that summer day, picturing the rushing river, the fear in her eyes, and the sense of relief when she was safe. And now, 20 years later, she was here, speaking words that made him realize how much had been left unspoken between them, how much life had passed, and yet somehow fate had brought them back together. The afternoon light began to soften, casting warm golden hues across the ranch. Jake found himself looking at Emily differently now, not as a visitor, not as a stranger, but as someone familiar, someone who had always held a place in his life even if he hadn't known it. There was something magnetic about her presence, a gentle insistence that made him want to open his heart, even though he had been cautious for so long. Emily noticed the change in him. I know this is a lot, she said, her voice gentle, but I wanted to come here and let you decide what comes next. I'm not asking for anything you're not ready for. I just wanted to be honest with you, to show you who I am and why I'm here. Jake nodded slowly, Feeling a mixture of relief and anticipation, he realized that the walls he had built around himself, the solitude he had relied on, were no longer enough to protect him. Emily's arrival had opened a door he hadn't even realized he had closed, and now he could feel a new path forming, a path that could lead to something neither of them expected but both had secretly hoped for. As the evening approached, the sky painted itself with hues of orange and pink, and the ranch seemed to hold its breath. Jake and Emily continued to talk, sharing more memories, more laughter, and more silence filled with meaning. Every word, every glance, every gesture brought them closer, bridging the 20-year gap that had separated them. Finally, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jake felt a shift within himself. He still had doubts, still had fears, but he could no longer deny the connection he felt. The girl he had saved had returned, grown and confident, and she had brought with her the possibility of something extraordinary, a chance to rewrite a story that had begun 20 years ago. I think I remember everything now, he said quietly, looking into her eyes. I remember the river, I remember you. I remember that day, and I think I understand why you're here. Emily reached out and took his hand again, her touch gentle and reassuring. I knew you would, she said softly. I had to come here to be with you, and now that I am, I just want us to take things one step at a time. We'll figure it out together. Jake nodded, a small smile forming on his lips. For the first time in a long time, he felt hope stirring in his chest. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. Emily's arrival had changed everything. Their story, begun 2 decades ago in fear and uncertainty, was now continuing in a way he had never imagined, and he was ready to see where it led. The ranch settled into quiet evening sounds, crickets chirping, cattle moving slowly, and the wind whispering through the trees. But in the heart of the farmhouse porch, a new story was beginning. One of memories, courage, and a connection that had waited 20 years to be renewed. And as Jake and Emily sat side by side, sharing stories and hope, the world outside could wait. For now, they had each other, and that was enough. The next morning, Jake woke to the soft golden light streaming through the windows of his farmhouse. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with the earthy scent of the ranch outside, and for a moment everything felt peaceful and normal. But as he sat on the edge of his bed, he couldn't stop thinking about Emily. She was still asleep in the guest room, her soft breathing audible through the thin walls. Jake felt a strange combination of joy, anxiety, and curiosity. He had never imagined that his quiet life could change so suddenly. Yet here it was, transforming in ways he couldn't control. Downstairs, he poured himself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, watching the morning sun reflect on the fields. His mind wandered back to the day he had saved Emily. He remembered the panic in her little eyes, the rush of the river, the cold shock of the water, and the relief he had felt when she had been safe. He had thought about her over the years, sometimes in passing, often in moments of quiet reflection. And now she was here, grown and confident, looking him in the eye, telling him that she had never forgotten. Jake knew he had to be honest with her. He couldn't simply let things drift without acknowledging the weight of what had happened 20 years ago, and the feelings it had stirred. He poured his coffee, grabbed his hat, and stepped out onto the porch. The ranch stretched before him, bathed in morning light, but today it felt different. Today it felt like a stage set for something extraordinary, something that would demand more courage than he had ever needed before. Emily stepped out of the guest room, stretching slightly as she yawned. She wore simple clothes, her hair tied back loosely, and her eyes sparkled with the same determination that had brought her here. She noticed Jake on the porch and smiled, walking over to join him. "Morning," she said softly. "Morning," Jake replied, trying to sound casual, though his heart raced. "I was just thinking." Emily tilted her head, sensing the seriousness in his tone. "About what?" she asked gently. Jake took a deep breath, trying to gather his thoughts. "About us. About you being here. And about that day, 20 years ago. I need to know everything, how you remember it, why you came, and what you want from me now." Emily nodded, understanding the gravity in his voice. "I understand," she said. "And I'll tell you everything. But I need you to know that what I want, it's not simple. I've thought about this for years, and coming here wasn't easy. But I had to do it. You saved my life, and you shaped who I became, and now I want to see if we can build something together if you're willing." Jake felt a mixture of awe and hesitation. He had spent his life avoiding risks, living quietly, keeping himself insulated from the unpredictable nature of human relationships. And now fate had delivered a challenge he could not ignore, a connection with someone he had saved decades ago, someone who had returned to claim a place in his life. For the rest of the morning, they worked together on small chores around the ranch. Jake showed Emily how to feed the calves, check the fences, and mend broken boards. She was eager to help, asking questions and learning quickly. As they worked side by side, a comfortable rhythm developed. Laughter punctuated their conversation, and for brief moments it felt as though the years had melted away. The bond they had formed during that brief summer so long ago seemed to resurface naturally, as if time had been waiting for this moment to bring them back together. But as the day wore on, Jake began to notice the subtle tension in Emily's expression. She seemed hesitant at times, pausing mid-task as though she was weighing her words carefully. Finally, during a break, she set down the tools and turned to him. "Jake," she said softly, "I need to tell you something else. It's about why I came back, and why I can't ignore what I feel." Jake leaned against the fence, bracing himself. "Go on," he said. Emily took a deep breath. "After I grew up, after I learned more about life and myself, I realized that the day you saved me didn't just protect me physically. It inspired me to be brave, to trust in people, and to believe that good things can happen even when life is hard. I've carried that with me every day, and somewhere along the way I realized I never stopped caring about you. I never stopped hoping that one day I could tell you how much you meant to me." Jake felt his heart tighten. The words were powerful, and the honesty in her voice touched him deeply. But he also felt a wave of fear. Could he trust these feelings? Could he open himself to love after so many years of solitude? He began, struggling to find the right words. "I've spent years alone, Emily. I've built this life to keep things simple, to avoid getting hurt. And now, you're here and I don't know what to do. I want to trust you, I want to feel what you feel, but I'm afraid." Emily stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "I understand," she said. "I'm not asking you to rush anything. I'm not asking you to promise me forever. I just want you to see me, to know the truth, and to take the time to understand what we could have together. We can take it one day at a time." Jake nodded slowly. The words eased some of his tension, but the weight of the decision remained. He realized that this wasn't just about feelings, it was about trust, about letting go of fear, about opening himself to the unknown. And for the first time in a long time, he felt a spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, it was worth taking that risk. Later that afternoon, as the sun moved low in the sky, Jake and Emily took a walk across the fields. The ranch stretched endlessly around them, the tall grasses swaying gently in the breeze. Birds sang from the trees, and the distant mountains loomed like silent witnesses to their conversation. "I want to know more about your life," Jake said finally, breaking a comfortable silence. 20 years. That's a long time. What have you been through? Who have you become?" Emily smiled a little wistfully. "I've grown, I've learned, I've faced challenges. I've made mistakes, but I've also found courage I didn't know I had. And through it all, I remembered you. That day you saved me. It shaped everything about who I am. I wouldn't be here standing in front of you if it weren't for that moment, and now, I want to see if we can write the next chapter together." Jake felt a warmth in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. The walls he had built around himself were slowly crumbling brick by brick. He wanted to take her hand, to tell her he felt the same, but the fear of getting hurt still lingered. He needed time to process, to understand that this wasn't just a dream, that Emily was real, and that she had returned with intentions that were genuine and heartfelt. As they walked, Emily noticed his hesitation. "Jake," she said gently, "I don't expect everything to happen at once. I don't expect you to have all the answers. I just want to be honest with you, and I want to see if we can explore this together." Jake stopped and looked at her, the golden light of the setting sun casting a warm glow on her face. Her eyes were earnest, filled with hope and determination, and in that moment he realized that fear alone couldn't hold him back. He had a choice: to retreat into solitude or to step forward and embrace the possibility of a connection that had waited 20 years to be renewed. I want that," he said quietly. "I want to see where this goes. I'm scared, yes, but I also feel something I can't ignore, something I've never felt before. Emily's face brightened with a soft smile. "That's all I need," she said. "We'll take it one step at a time. That's enough for now." As evening settled over the ranch, the sky painted with shades of pink and orange, they walked back toward the farmhouse hand in hand, feeling the weight of the past and the hope of the future intertwining. The world outside continued its quiet rhythm, but for Jake and Emily, everything had changed. The story that had begun 20 years ago was now moving forward, filled with uncertainty, emotion, and the promise of something extraordinary. That night, Jake lay awake in his bed thinking about the day, about Emily, and about the possibilities that lay ahead. He realized that life had a way of surprising him, of bringing unexpected moments of beauty and connection into the quietest of places. And for the first time in years, he felt a sense of anticipation, of excitement, and of hope. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, he was ready to walk it. The next morning, Jake woke to the sound of the wind rustling through the tall grass outside his window. The ranch, as usual, was alive with the quiet rhythm of life. Cows grazing, birds singing, and the soft hum of the distant river. But this morning felt different. There was an energy in the air, a sense that the day would not unfold quietly. Jake could feel it in the pit of his stomach, a mixture of anticipation and unease. He stepped onto the porch with his cup of coffee, taking in the wide, open view of the ranch. The sky was clear, painted with soft shades of orange and gold, and for a moment he felt the usual calm settle over him. But he couldn't ignore the excitement that had been building since Emily's arrival. Something about her presence stirred a feeling he had long suppressed, the kind of hope and courage he thought he had lost with time. Emily appeared in the doorway, carrying a basket of freshly baked bread she had made the night before. She smiled when she saw him on the porch, a warmth in her eyes that made Jake's heart skip a beat. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice carrying a quiet confidence. "I thought we could have breakfast outside today." Jake nodded, feeling a little nervous. "That sounds nice," he said. He watched as she spread a blanket on the porch steps, setting out the bread, some butter, and a small jar of jam. Her movements were careful, thoughtful, and there was a peacefulness about her that made Jake feel both comforted and unsettled. Comforted because her presence was soothing, unsettled because he wasn't used to sharing such simple, intimate moments with anyone. As they ate, they talked about small things, the weather, the ranch, and the plans for the day. But Jake noticed that Emily's gaze often drifted toward the distant mountains, her expression thoughtful. Finally, she set down her plate and looked directly at him. "Jake," she began gently, "I want to be honest with you about something. When I came back here, I knew it wouldn't be easy. I knew that life has its challenges, and I knew that we've both changed over the years. But I also knew that we couldn't ignore what we feel. I had to take this chance no matter the risks." Jake took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words. "I understand," he said slowly, "and I want to try. I want to see where this goes. But I'm also aware that life on the ranch isn't easy, and the challenges we face, well, they're real." Emily nodded, her eyes steady. "I know, and I'm ready for that. I didn't come here expecting it to be perfect. I came here knowing that there would be hard work, challenges, and moments of doubt. But I also know that if we face them together, we can handle anything." They spent the morning tending to the ranch together, repairing fences, checking on the livestock, and carrying out the daily tasks that kept the property running. As they worked side by side, Jake noticed how skilled and capable Emily had become. She moved with confidence, asking questions, offering suggestions, and learning quickly. There was a rhythm to their teamwork that felt natural, a sense of partnership that neither of them had expected but both silently welcomed. By midday, a sudden commotion in the distance caught Jake's attention. Smoke was rising from the far side of the property, near the edge of the hills where the dry grass grew thick and tall. His heart sank. Wildfires were not uncommon in this region, especially during late summer, and they could spread quickly if not contained. "Emily," Jake called urgently, "come with me. There's a fire near the East Hill. We need to check it out before it spreads." Emily nodded without hesitation. "I'll grab the equipment," she said, her voice steady despite the urgency. Together they ran toward the fire, carrying buckets of water, shovels, and whatever tools they could find to help contain it. As they approached the flames, Jake's training and experience kicked in. He assessed the situation quickly, directing Emily to create a fire break and douse the smaller flames before they could spread. Emily moved with determination, following his instructions and offering her own ideas to fight the fire. The two of them worked in harmony, their trust in each other growing with every passing moment. Despite their efforts, the fire was relentless. The wind shifted unexpectedly, sending sparks flying toward the nearby trees. Jake's heart pounded as he realized that if they didn't act quickly, the fire could reach the farmhouse. He looked at Emily, her face streaked with sweat and dirt, and felt a surge of protectiveness. "Emily, stay close to me," he shouted over the roar of the flames. "We'll get through this together." Emily nodded, determination in her eyes. "I'm right here, Jake, let's do this." For what felt like hours, they battled the fire. They dug trenches, pulled wet blankets over small flames, and carried buckets of water to douse the hottest spots. The smoke made it hard to breathe, and the heat pressed down on them like a living thing, but neither of them wavered. They were united in purpose, relying on each other for strength and support. At one point, a larger flame leapt unexpectedly toward Jake. He instinctively pushed Emily out of the way, shielding her with his own body. The heat singed his jacket, and he felt a brief panic, but he managed to stay on his feet. Emily grabbed his hand, steadying him. "We've got this," she said, her voice firm and unwavering. "We can do it." Together they fought with everything they had. Sweat streamed down their faces, their muscles ached, and their lungs burned from the smoke. But their determination never faltered. Slowly they began to gain control over the fire, containing it before it could spread further. By late afternoon, the worst of the flames were extinguished, and the ranch was safe once again. They collapsed onto the grass, exhausted but relieved. Jake looked at Emily, noticing the dirt on her face, the sweat in her hair, and the fire of determination still burning in her eyes. He felt an overwhelming sense of admiration and gratitude. She had not only been brave, but had proven herself capable of facing danger without hesitation. "You were incredible," he said quietly, his voice filled with emotion. I don't know what I would have done without you." Emily smiled, though she was clearly tired. "We did it together," she replied. "I couldn't have done it alone, and neither could you. We make a good team." Jake nodded, feeling a deep connection stronger than ever. The day had tested them, pushed them to their limits, and yet they had emerged stronger. He realized that this was more than just a simple bond. It was trust, respect, and a shared understanding that had been forged in the heat of challenge. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the ranch, Jake and Emily walked back to the farmhouse. The air was still thick with smoke, but there was also a sense of calm, of victory, and of life continuing despite the trials they had faced. They didn't speak much, but the silence between them was comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding and mutual respect. Once inside, Jake poured them both a glass of water, and they sat on the porch, watching the last light fade from the sky. The events of the day had left them exhausted but connected in a way neither had anticipated. Jake realized that Emily's presence had brought not just warmth and companionship, but courage and partnership into his life. She was no longer just the girl he had saved 20 years ago. She was a force, a partner, and a reminder that life's challenges could be faced together. I can't believe how brave you were today," Jake said, finally breaking the quiet. "You didn't hesitate for a moment, you just jumped in and helped." Emily shook her head slightly, smiling. "I learned from the best," she said softly. "You saved me once, and now I wanted to be here to help you. To face life with you, not behind you or ahead of you, but right beside you." Jake felt a warmth in his chest, a feeling that went beyond gratitude or admiration. It was something deeper, a bond that had been tested and proven strong. The day had brought danger, fear, and uncertainty, but it had also brought clarity. He could no longer deny what he felt for Emily, nor could he ignore the connection that had waited 20 years to be renewed. As night fell over the ranch, the stars emerging one by one in the clear sky, Jake and Emily sat together in comfortable silence. The fire had tested them, but it had also shown them what they could face together. And in that moment, Jake knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, he and Emily would face them side by side with courage, trust, and a bond that had been forged over decades. The ranch was quiet again, but inside Jake's heart there was a new kind of peace, a sense that the past, the present, and the future were finally coming together. Emily had arrived, bringing not only love and companionship but also the courage and partnership that life had long demanded. And as they sat together under the stars, he knew that the story they had begun 20 years ago was now moving forward into something extraordinary, something neither of them could have imagined but both had secretly hoped for. The days that followed the fire were busy, but for Jake and Emily there was a new rhythm to life on the ranch. Each morning they woke early, tending to the animals and repairing the fences that had been damaged by the recent flames. But the work felt different now, not a lonely routine but a shared purpose. They laughed more easily, moved with a sense of partnership, and found small moments of joy in even the simplest tasks. Jake noticed how Emily had adapted to the ranch life, how she carried herself with confidence and care. She knew how to handle the cattle, how to spot trouble in the fences, and how to navigate the wide-open fields with ease. He admired her, not just for her skill but for her courage, her determination, and the warmth she brought into his quiet life. Emily, too, felt a deep connection growing between them. She had returned to the ranch with hope, but each day she spent there, each task she completed alongside Jake, strengthened her certainty that she had made the right choice. This was home not just because of the land, but because of the man who had once saved her life and now shared his life with her. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Jake and Emily sat on the porch with mugs of hot tea in their hands. The ranch was quiet, the only sounds coming from the soft rustle of the wind through the trees and the occasional low of the cattle. There was a calmness in the air, a sense that life had slowed down just enough for them to breathe, to reflect, and to truly feel. "I've been thinking," Jake began, his voice quiet but steady, "about everything. The fire, your arrival, and how life has brought us back together after all these years." Emily nodded, her eyes meeting his. "I've been thinking too," she said softly. "I never imagined that returning here would lead to this. But now that it has, I wouldn't change a thing." Jake took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. He had waited 20 years to see her again, and now she was here, not as a child, but as a woman he could respect, admire, and care for deeply. He realized that life was offering him a second chance, not just at love, but at connection, at partnership, and at happiness. "Emily," he said finally, his voice tinged with emotion, "I want you to know something. The day I saved you, I never thought it would lead to this. I never imagined that I would see you again or that I would feel what I feel now, but I do, and I want to be with you if you'll have me." Emily's face lit up with a soft smile and her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Jake," she whispered, "I've dreamed of this moment for years. I never stopped hoping that we would meet again. And now that we have, I want nothing more than to be with you, to share life with you, and to see what we can build together." They sat in silence for a moment, letting the weight of their words sink in. The sky above them deepened into twilight, the first stars appearing like tiny sparks of hope. Jake reached for Emily's hand, holding it gently in his, feeling the warmth and comfort of her presence. The following days were filled with quiet preparation. They discussed the possibility of a future together, talking openly about their hopes, dreams, and fears. Jake shared his life on the ranch, the responsibilities, the challenges, and the joys of living in the wide open spaces. Emily listened, offering ideas and support, showing a willingness to embrace not just him, but the life he had built. One afternoon, as they repaired a fence near the river where Jake had rescued Emily 20 years ago, he paused, looking out over the water. The memory of that day was vivid, the rushing current, her frightened cries, and the relief he had felt when she was safe. Now, standing beside her as an adult, he felt a sense of closure, a feeling that the past and present had finally come together. "Do you remember this spot?" he asked, his voice gentle. Emily smiled, her eyes softening. "I remember it clearly," she said. "This is where everything changed for me, where I realized that life can be frightening, but also full of hope, where I learned that people can make a difference." Jake nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. "And now here you are, back in my life. I can't tell you how much that means to me." Emily reached up, touching his arm lightly. "You don't have to say anything," she said. "We've both lived our lives, and now we have a chance to start a new chapter together." The days passed, each one bringing them closer. They worked together, shared meals, and spent quiet evenings talking under the stars. Jake found himself laughing more, feeling lighter than he had in years. Emily felt a sense of belonging she had longed for, knowing that she was exactly where she needed to be. Finally, one evening as the sun set in a blaze of orange and purple, Emily turned to Jake with a determined look. "Jake," she said softly, "I think it's time." Jake raised an eyebrow, curious.
Time for what?
Emily smiled, her eyes shining. Time to make this official. To commit to each other, to the life we want to build, and to honor the bond we've had since that summer so long ago. Jake felt his heart race. He had thought about this moment, wondered about it, even feared it, but now that it had arrived, he knew he couldn't let it pass. He took her hands in his, looking deeply into her eyes. Emily, I've waited a long time for this moment. I've never stopped thinking about you, never stopped hoping that we could find each other again. And now that we have, I want nothing more than to spend the rest of my life with you. Tears filled Emily's eyes as she smiled, feeling the depth of his words. I feel the same, she whispered. I've carried this with me for 20 years, and now it's finally real. They made plans for a small ceremony on the ranch, surrounded by the land that had shaped their lives and the memories that had brought them together. Friends from nearby towns and family who had stayed in touch over the years were invited, and the day arrived bright and clear, with the mountains standing as silent witnesses to their union. As they exchanged vows under the open sky, Jake thought back to the little girl he had rescued. He marveled at how life had unfolded, how fate had brought them together again, and how love had waited patiently for the right moment. Emily's words were heartfelt, sincere, and full of the same courage and determination she had shown all along. When they sealed their vows with a gentle kiss, the world seemed to hold its breath. The ranch, the mountains, and the river where it all began bore witness to a story that had begun 20 years ago and now reached its joyful conclusion. Jake and Emily stood together, hand in hand, ready to face the future, knowing that the challenges and joys ahead would be met together, with trust, courage, and love. The reception was simple but full of warmth. Friends and family shared stories, laughter, and music under the open sky. The ranch, usually quiet and reserved, was alive with joy and celebration. Jake and Emily moved among their guests, their hands never leaving each other's, their smiles reflecting the happiness that had been a long time coming. Later that evening, after the guests had departed and the stars twinkled above, Jake and Emily sat together on the porch, reflecting on the day and the journey that had brought them there. I can't believe how far we've come, Jake said softly, his voice filled with awe. Emily leaned her head on his shoulder. I can, she said gently. I've always believed this day would come, and now that it has, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Jake wrapped his arm around her, feeling the warmth of her presence, the steady beat of her heart, and the sense of completion that came from finding the one person who had always mattered most. Life on the ranch would continue with its work, its challenges, and its quiet beauty. But now there was something new, a shared life, a shared love, and a story that had waited 20 years to be told. As they watched the stars emerge in the clear night sky, Jake and Emily knew that their journey was only beginning. The past had shaped them. The present had brought them together, and the future awaited, full of promise, adventure, and the quiet, enduring strength of a love that had survived time and distance. For the first time in many years, Jake felt completely at peace. He had found the girl he had saved, grown into the woman he could love, and together they would face whatever life brought side by side. The ranch, the river, and the mountains had witnessed their first meeting, and now they would witness the life they would build together, a life filled with love, courage, and hope. And as the wind whispered through the trees and the stars shone above, Jake and Emily sat hand in hand, knowing that their story, begun 20 years ago, had finally found its happy ending.